Hello, my name is Robert Herrick. I am a research professor at the Geophysical Institute here at UAF. In a few weeks, I will be moving to the Institute of Northern Engineering across campus. And the reason for this move is because it is part of a settlement agreement that has been reached between UAF administration and the faculty union according to their grievance procedure. The reason that I'm making this video is that during the course of the complaint and grievance procedure, an important university policy was created or elucidated, depending on your point of view, that is relevant to every faculty member on campus, particularly the research faculty. And I want you to sort of understand how this came about so that you can evaluate its applicability to you and get a feel for how university management thinks and views the research faculty. The policy that has been created is as follows. Provided that the approval of the granting agency can be obtained, a principal investigator for a grant or cooperative agreement can be removed and replaced by a dean or director for any reason at any time. Such actions do not constitute disciplinary action as defined in our collective bargaining agreement, but are simply considered an administrative decision, much like, for instance, setting of a faculty search committee or assigning office space. The dean or director, if they remove a PI, is expected to compensate the faculty member for their loss, but such compensation is really entirely at their discretion because there is no requirement that the removal of a PI, that decision be reviewed by the vice chancellor for research or any other administrative authority on campus. So I'm going to go through what occurred over the past 3.5 years or so, and I apologize, there will be a few many jump cuts as I stop the video and collect my thoughts and try and be as concise as possible while I go through this. Let me begin by taking you back in time to roughly the end of 2019, start of 2020. And there's three things going on at this time that are relevant to the discussion here. First, I was the principal investigator, the institutional PI for a large educational outreach consortium where the lead institute in the consortium was Alex Young, who was at Goddard Space Flight Center. And this outreach consortium, our participation in it had been initiated by a conversation between Alex Young and the Geophysical Institute director, Bob McCoy. Apparently they were friends, and he asked the GI to participate in the consortium. I was asked to be the institutional PI because I had a two-decade record of successfully doing science mission directorate funded educational outreach. And in fact, I was already known to the team at Goddard and worked with some of those people before. So I negotiated with Alex Young in the proposal process what the UA team would be doing. And it was a pretty successful negotiation. We were the largest funded partner in the team, and we were overall we were receiving $240K a year. This was a 5-year cooperative agreement, renewable to 10 years, and we were in the 4th year of that agreement. There are a couple of COIs to note on this. The first is that the program manager was Linda McGilvery, who is also at the Geophysical Institute and oversees the Educational Outreach Department. And the second COI of note is Jennifer Arsenault, who is over at the UA Museum of the North, and the Museum of the North was receiving roughly 40% of the funds under the cooperative agreement. The second relevant thing that's going on is that there is a digital portable planetarium program that existed that was at the time run out of the Geophysical Institute. This is a program that I had created from scratch with a donated planetarium back in around the 2007 timeframe, and I had funded the program for a number of years under a variety of configurations. In around 2016, I had turned over day-to-day management of the program to a postdoc, an enthusiastic postdoc that I had, and at the time, the scheduling was being done by Doreen Hayward, who is an employee in Linda McGilvery's department. And around 2017, the postdoc left UAF for a permanent position across the country. And at that time, Doreen and Linda said that they wanted to take over day-to-day management of the planetarium program. And unfortunately, this did not go very well, because basically they, rather than doing any actual management, they really just continued scheduling outings, and the outings were conducted by volunteers, and they recruited no new volunteers, and so the volunteer pool dwindled down to a couple of people, and the equipment was not maintained, and the equipment was falling apart. And so really things were so that what was happening was that the few remaining volunteers were really getting exploited. Safety protocols were being violated, and we were advertising that we were putting out a well-established curriculum with the planetarium when we went out to schools, but in fact what was occurring, we had had a software update, and the curriculum had been deleted as part of that, and so now we just had a grad student going out and sort of winging it when we went out to school. So the program was in bad shape as it stood in early 2019. However, the cooperative agreement, through the cooperative agreement, Goddard agreed to buy us new portable planetarium equipment, and that equipment arrived at the end of 2019. And I was going to take this opportunity here to sort of reboot the program, and I had told Linda and Doreen that when the new equipment came in, that what we were going to do was take a few month pause to learn new equipment, recruit new volunteers, develop new content, the new incoming portable planetarium, and sort of get things back on stable ground for that program. The third thing that was going on at this time was that there were ongoing negotiations with a potential donor for a fixed dome planetarium, a new building on campus that would house a permanent planetarium that would seat somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 or 70 people. And for many years, I had been involved in various efforts to bring a fixed dome planetarium to the university. I had produced a number of white papers. I had detailing cost estimates of what that would entail, talking about the various ways that the planetarium could be used and how it could be managed. I had toured planetarium factories, visited other planetariums, particularly the two fixed dome planetariums that are in the Anchorage area, but also other ones in around the country. And so this is the state of things around the end of 2019. As I mentioned, the new portable planetarium equipment arrived in December of 2019. And at that time, I told Linda and Doreen that we were going to take a pause on scheduling outings for the first few months in 2020. And at this point, Doreen would have none of this, and she sent me a very nasty email stating that what really needed to occur was that we needed to simultaneously keep sending out and keep scheduling outings and sending out the old planetarium, even as we were trying to do all the things that we needed to do with the new planetarium equipment. And that if I refused to continue outings with the old equipment, that this meant that I really had wanted to, that I was depriving children of an important opportunity. And so this culminated with Linda and Doreen secretly scheduling a planetarium outing in March to go to Yakutat and sending out a graduate student with the equipment. I only found out about it because the graduate student that they were going to send out happened to be one that I was advising, and he mentioned to me that he would be out of town on a planetarium trip for 3 days in March. So I found out about this literally the day that I was scheduled to fly out to go for a week-long NASA review panel. So I sent an email to Linda and Doreen telling them that they needed to cancel this planetarium outing and that I would deal with the situation when I got back in town. So while I was out of town, I received the email that you see on the screen now from Director McCoy. So a few things to note here. Apparently, while I was out of town, rather than ever attempting to settle things between Linda and myself, and this is really the first, over a multi-year period, this is really the first genuine dispute that I had with Linda McGilvery, and had exchanged any sort of negative emails with her. But rather than try and settle the dispute with me, apparently Linda went directly to Director McCoy And what you can see in this email is that Director McCoy doesn't seem to have any interest in resolving the dispute between Linda and I in some sort of amicable fashion. There's no, and you can see that he's already assigned blame before he's even consulted with me or spoken to me. And I'll point out that there is no effort at any point to say have human resources get involved in some sort of mediation or discussion or anything like this. So when I returned from my panel review with NASA in the next week, on February 14th, I had a meeting in Director McCoy's office, and David Reed, who is the business officer, was present, presumably to witness the meeting itself. And it was a very strange meeting in the sense that the first, it was supposed to be about this particular issue, but the first 20 to 30 minutes or so involved Director McCoy asking me about 3 Venus mission proposals that I was involved with, one of which I had been the PI for, and a couple that I was on science team for. And he kept insisting that these mission activities were really taking up all my time, which was in fact not the case at this point in the proceedings. None of these, 2 of them had virtually nothing going on, and all 3 of them were in a state where my involvement was minimal and was going to be minimal for at least the next several months until a year. But nevertheless, he moved on from this insisting that these were keeping busy to then informing me that he was going to remove me as the institutional PI on the cooperative agreement, and that he was going to hand over the being PI to Linda McGilvery, and that along with this, he was going to confiscate all of the portable planetarium equipment from me and turn that over to Linda and Doreen, and that they would be overseeing the portable planetarium program from here on out. And so at the time, this is in early 2020, as term faculty, it was clear that Director McCoy knew he was doing something wrong. He was very nervous in his voice, but I simply evaluated at the time as term faculty, all that had to happen for me to no longer have a job was simply for Bob McCoy not to renew my contract. And I was unwilling to risk complete, I thought I could probably win the battle and get reinstated as PI, but then lose the war and ultimately have him remove me from my job simply by not renewing my contract. So I did nothing at the time. Director McCoy in the meeting said that he would compensate me for my loss in 2 ways. Basically, he said he'd give me that since I was only as the PI, I was only charging 10% of my time to the cooperative agreement, and so he said, well, I'll give you a month's pay for the next 2 years to make up for the time that you were charging to the CA, and also this fixed dome planetarium, those negotiations are going to be successful. And when they are successful, there's going to be a funded position for a science advisor to the fixed dome planetarium, and that's going to be you. And that's going to be a lot bigger deal than this portable planetarium program, so don't even worry about that. And he also instructed me not to contact the overall PI, Alex Young. He said, "Oh, don't worry about that. I will handle the informing Goddard that the PI is changing, and I'll do it in a way that it doesn't reflect badly on you. So don't worry about that. I'm going to handle all that." And so that was the state of things in late February 2020. So fast forward now to the end of 2021, roughly 21 months later. And at this point, of course, in the interim, there had been the COVID lockdowns and such. So at the end of 2021, this time when they had no outings of any kind to the schools, apparently not only had they done no content development for the portable planetarium, it seems like no one had even bothered to even look at the owner's manual, because at the end of 2021, Linda's department goes back to the same well and secretly contacts the same graduate student to try and to have that person now train a new, a relatively new educational outreach coordinator that they hired on how to use the portable planetarium. And so I mentioned this to Bob, and his only response to Director McCoy, and his only response is, well, I'll find a way to compensate you for your graduate students' paid time that you were paying for. Of course, that never happened. During this time, I heard almost nothing about negotiations regarding the fixed dome planetarium. I basically assume that these have more or less completely fallen through. And so while I had written in negotiations for the fixed dome planetarium into my workload for the 2020-21 academic year, but having I assumed that things had fallen through, so I did not include that on my 21-22 workload. But then suddenly in April of 2022 now, Director McCoy announces that they have nearly finalized a deal to bring a fixed dome planetarium to UAF, and that suddenly there's no mention of me, but there is mention that Linda McGilvery's department will be providing content for the new planetarium, that there will be a funded science advisor for the planetarium, and that someone else will be for some reason, that the person who will decide what the new projection system is for the planetarium will be the IT director for the GI, Liam Forbes, which is very strange. And I then later find out through my sources at the Museum of the North that in fact during negotiations, Bob McCoy has named a potential who will be this science advisor person, and it's in fact a physics professor who has no background in planetary or space science. So at this point, I want to share an email from Director McCoy to me. And in this highlighted sentence you see here, the only reason that this sentence would be written is if I had been that I purposely excluded from the negotiations and they had been kept secret from me. So at this point, I realize that I have effectively been fully blacklisted by Director McCoy, that he's never going to cease punishing me for whatever he seems to think I deserve punishment for. And I'm not going to have any future opportunities to advance my career at the GI. And so at this point, I consulted with the faculty union, and after doing so, I decided that I would go forward to UAF administration and see what I could to do to sort of be made whole again. And so the first person that I consulted was the provost of Newton Prakash. She had actually occupied at one point the office next door to mine in the GI. After talking to her, she then said that the appropriate person to consult with would be the Vice Chancellor for Research, Nettie LaBelle-Hamer. I was reluctant to do this because of her long-standing ties to the GI director, but nevertheless, I went and consulted with the Vice Chancellor, with the VCR. She then had me conduct a long interview with Aaron Menshouse, who works for her, and he informed me that he had looked through NASA regulations and concluded that the actions that Director McCoy had taken, he did not think met NASA's definition of research misconduct, and that he would write up his findings and refer the matter to UAHR. And so I then inquired back with Nettie and Aaron Menshouse a few times after that. I received no response from them, and so eventually I contacted Anutma again and said that Nettie seemed to have just ceased responding to my emails, and I had no idea what was going on, if anything. But one thing that had certainly gone on is that Director McCoy had found out that I had gone forward, because he also ceased answering my emails. And so after speaking with Anutma, she said if the VCR was not responding, then I should go up to the Chancellor's office. So I then had a discussion with the Chancellor, and then the Chancellor, after I explained what had happened to him, then assigned the matter to Brian Hoppa, who is our Human Resources Senior Business Partner. And I think he sort of serves as a liaison between the Chancellor's office and UAHR. So anyway, I have a long discussion with Brian Hoppa, and then he in turn turns it over to UAHR. And then I eventually have a discussion with Nicolette Rabley, who is UAHR Senior Labor and Employee Relations Specialist. And during this meeting, she advances the theory that there are only two conditions that are considered disciplinary action by the university, and that this is not one of those conditions. And so, to back up a little, a key, an element that has been going through all of these discussions, particularly after my consultation with the union, is that in the collective bargaining agreement for faculty, there is a section on disciplinary actions. And the basic gist of this is that if an administrator is going to do something that badly damages a faculty member's career, such as terminate them or reduce their salary or demote them or things like this, that there is a strict procedure that is to be followed by the administrator that involves a hearing process. And essentially the goal is to make sure that what constitutes fair punishment is not determined solely by a faculty member's boss. And so anyway, Ms. Radley advances this idea that that there are very limited things that are considered disciplinary action, and that what Director McCoy has done does not constitute disciplinary action. And if you actually read the collective bargaining agreement, there is no she didn't quote any part of that agreement, because in the CBA there is no section that limits what is constitutes disciplinary action. There is, however, very specific limitations on what is allowed to be considered an offense great enough to warrant disciplinary action. And it was very clear at this point that my actions did not meet those criteria. So during her investigation, Ms. Radley interviewed Director McCoy and Linda McGilvery, but she did not interview David Reed, who had been present for the discussion between Director McCoy and myself. And she did not contact anyone at NASA to see, to find out, and nobody so far from UAF, as far as I can tell, has ever contacted NASA to evaluate whether their procedures were properly followed in changing the PI, whether they had conducted the reviews that they are expected to conduct, or what in fact was said by UAF to NASA when I was removed as principal investigator. So there's been no contact by UAF to NASA regarding this matter. So after Ms. Radley conducts her initial investigation, the chancellor then assigns the vice chancellor for research to be the person who is going to handle and resolve the complaint between that I have brought forth against Director McCoy. So after the VCR is assigned to resolve the complaint, she sets what she describes as going to be a facilitated discussion between Director McCoy and myself for a date in late December 2022. And so we have this discussion, which basically is clearly a staged ambush, more or less a struggle session. And during the discussion, because she asserts that because Doreen and Linda are not present at this discussion, it is not allowed for me to question or to discuss any aspects negatively, discuss any aspects of their job performance during their involvement in the cooperative agreement, nor am I allowed to challenge any assertions that Director McCoy makes about their job performance and their administration of the cooperative agreement and their management of the portable planetarium program. Nevertheless, during this facilitated discussions, a few key admissions are made by Director McCoy. First, he states that he had in 2019, in the year before he removes me, that he had secretly had several discussions with Linda McGilvery where she had chafed at having to take direction from me as the principal investigator. However, neither Linda nor Director McCoy had ever brought any of these concerns to me. Also, Director McCoy now floats yet another new reason different from what he had emailed me and discussed with me in his office in 2020, or from what he had put in the internal paperwork when he followed for the change in PI. Now he says that the real reason that he removed me as PI is because I was not visible enough during a 5-day trip when the overall principal investigator Alex Young had visited the GI in order to witness a launch out at Poker Flat. And of course, I had actually met with Alex Young on 4 separate occasions during his 5-day visit to Fairbanks. But anyway, this new theory was floated for why I had been removed as PI. And then finally, upon being asked as to whether he had promised the science advisor position to me, he deflects on that point and would neither confirm nor deny that he promised this position to me. So after that meeting, we were scheduled to have another meeting in January. And then in January, we had another meeting, but basically what happens here is that the BCR reads a prepared memo that she then sent, supposedly resolving the complaint. And so the BCR has never, despite being asked, has never actually provided a statement of what the official policy is for removal of a principal investigator. However, if you read the memo that she produced in resolving this complaint, some principles are put forth. One is that that really all that matters in terms of removing a PI is that the director needed the approval of NASA, and they approved the change in principal investigator. She also now expands upon the idea that my removal as principal investigator, or simply removing someone as principal investigator, does not constitute disciplinary action. It's an administrative decision. and it's okay that this is done because Director McCoy compensated me for the loss. And then she states that the removal of a PI does not need to be approved by the VCR or any other authority on campus. Finally, one concession that she does make is that now in the future, if there is a funded or when there is if the Fixed Dome Planetarium comes to UAF and there is a funded science advisor position, that position will be competed and that I will be allowed to compete for that position. In the accompanying documents, I provide both the VCR's memo and a point-by-point rebuttal of the contents of that memo. So after the VCR has resolved the complaint, then I consult with the union and we decide to go forward with the formal grievance process that the union has when there is perceived to be a violation of the collective bargaining agreement. And the key thrust of the complaint filed by the union is that the procedures regarding disciplinary action against a faculty member have not been followed. And so in the first step of the grievance process, you file the grievance and the grievance goes to your direct supervisor, in this case, Director McCoy. And then Director McCoy makes his response to the grievance. And so these documents are included, and the grievance response that Director McCoy has put forward, I guess what I can say at this point is that really nothing epitomizes my relationship with this university better than what occurred in March of 2023. So during this time, I had a major paper come out. It received worldwide attention. I was getting hundreds of news articles were written about it. I was on live TV in multiple countries, and gave this paper at a major planetary conference, and NASA had a press conference associated with it. And then when I returned home from the conference, I received Bob McCoy's response to the grievance, which I can really only describe as a hateful and deeply dishonest screed you can read as part of the attached documents. And so in the response that he had put forth, he now asserts that again, that his actions were purely administrative actions and that they were not disciplinary in nature. But he also asserts that the only reason that I had been involved in the original cooperative agreement was as a personal favor to me because I was struggling with my ability to raise funds and support my own salary. And so as supporting evidence for this, he actually shows the amount of Fund 1 funding that I had charged the GI in the 6 years after the cooperative agreement had been awarded. So made no sense, but I will share the screen with you on that. And the interesting thing about this is it shows exactly what I would expect it to show, which is that the GI is supposed to cover 41% of my salary. That's the rule. And in a given year, over the course of a year, my ability to exactly match 41% charging to the GI is, I was off by perhaps a week or two going in each of these years. I try and charge right at 41% so that I can use the remainder of my grant funding to, as much as possible, fund postdocs, students, and staff, and other people at the GI besides myself. In particular, Linda McGilvery and her staff for a number of years. And so that's what you see here. Another element of what he says in here, he now advances a brand new reason for me being dismissed as principal investigator, which is that I was not engaged in the overall cooperative agreement. And the evidence for this is that I had not gone out with the portable planetarium more than a handful of times over a 5-year period. And he shows a list of who has gone out with the portable planetarium, which I'm showing right here. Interestingly, names that you will not see on this list, one name in particular is Linda McGilvery, nor when you see Doreen Hayward, it's only mentioned a couple of times as an assistant when she goes out. And that's because Linda and Doreen have never gone out and given presentations with the portable planetarium. What the list does show, and it confirms everything that I said, which is that after my postdoc, Emma Marcucci, left in 2017, that increasingly there was a dwindling pool of volunteers, and that they were clearly exploiting one of my graduate students in particular. And if this list is to be believed, he's gone out something like I don't know, 13 or 14 times over a 1.5-year period. And these include being sent out alone to very remote locations for multiple days. So, and finally, even though nothing had changed on the ground regarding the fixed dome planetarium since the VCR's memo, Director McCoy now asserts that because Linda McGilvery in 2022 had received this enormous grant from the National Science Foundation that proved the GI's commitment to the planetarium program, that there is no need for a science advisor position. And so in what I think is probably a pretty clear act of retaliation, he decides that there will no longer be a funded science advisor position for the fixed dome planetarium. So the next step in the grievance process is to, the step 2 grievance goes to the provost and Newton McPrakash. So what occurs is we rebut the key points in the step 1 response by Director McCoy. And as part of the grievance process, the union puts forth remedies for the grievance. And so what we decide as we're going advancing things to Provost Prakash, we decide that what we'll do is focus on the things that are important to me at this point, and we request as remedy basically return of all the portable planetarium equipment, along with what we had before, which was adequate funding for both staff and travel in order to make that a functioning portable planetarium program again. Also, the promise or guarantee that there will be, if the fixed dome planetarium becomes a reality, that I will in fact have a funded science advisor position. And then sort of the last stipulation along with that is that these actions, if carried out, will restore the reputation, my professional reputation, which has been damaged obviously by having been removed as the principal investigator for the cooperative agreement. So while during the step 2 grievance process, the negotiator for the union contacts the legal counsel for the union and has a discussion with him. And in this discussion, he basically states that, in fact, yes, as long as administration has not put a demerit in my personnel file or fired me or reduced my pay, then in fact they can defeat the disciplinary action stipulations in the collective bargaining agreement by simply declaring that actions that they've taken against me are not disciplinary in nature. He basically tells the negotiator that we probably should never have brought the grievance forward, and he's surprised by the concessions that we have already received, and advises the negotiator that we should accept whatever the settlement is that is put forth by the provost. And at this point, unbeknownst to me, in order to advance the grievance to the next level, which would be the chancellor's office, requires a positive vote from the union's executive board. And so the negotiator advises the executive board that she doesn't think that we should go forward with the grievance. And in fact, the executive board then unanimously votes against me on this matter. I'll say that I felt quite strongly, and do feel quite strongly, as I'll explain here in a minute, that this issue is really an existential one for the research faculty, and it's something that the union should have gone to the mat for, and that they have, in my opinion, lost moral authority by not pursuing this matter further. And that they're signing on to this settlement offer constitutes really signing on to the policy position that the university has put forward. So that brings us to the settlement offer that was put forward by Provost Prakash, and is one that I was given essentially a take this or nothing option to sign, and which I signed. And so if there was any doubt as to whether the university was intending to set policy by the BCR's memo and subsequent statements by Director McCoy, I think the settlement offer makes it clear that they do intend to set policy, because what came forth in the settlement offer was basically that I was given sort of a break-even deal in terms of moving from the GI to I&E. Basically, the I&E covers less salary for research faculty, and so all that the settlement involves covering enough for 2 years so that I don't lose the level of support I have at the GI. And then there's some funds provided to restore the planetarium for me to buy new planetarium equipment. And so if you follow this carefully, essentially what's being conceded by the university is that because the planetarium equipment was purchased and under my control before I was removed as PI, that should be returned to me. And then they're simply making it possible for me to move over to INE, but not returning any of the salary or grant money or anything else that I had lost in February of 2020. And finally, as part of the settlement offer, the provost provided a letter that states that my removal as PI had nothing to do with my job performance or administration of the cooperative agreement. So another aspect of the grievance process is that the union is allowed to make requests for information, documents, emails, and so on. And I want to go through these briefly, in part because it's unfortunate that the union chose to stop the grievance process because we did not receive the documents, all of the documents requested, but what we did receive was in some ways pretty revealing. So one thing that we didn't receive was a listing of how often PIs are forcibly removed at UAF and what the reasons for their forcible removal is. Director McCoy asserted during the meeting and in his grievance response that this occurs all the time, that he basically removes PIs all the time, whereas other administration officials indicated that it seemed that it's quite a rarity and that it would be sort of unprecedented for somebody to be removed as PI without there being a demonstration of gross malfeasance on their part. So we don't know the answer to that in particular. Another thing that we had asked for was the paperwork and correspondence regarding the reasons for the removal that were given to NASA. We didn't get that. We didn't get the paperwork that was filed with NASA or their organization, NSSDC, that handles their grants. Interestingly, I also have emailed Alex Young asking for this information, and he has refused to provide that information either. So we don't know what was involved there, whether reviews were properly conducted, etc. However, what was provided in there was by the university was an email exchange between Linda McGilvery and Alex Young that was dated the day that I was informed by Director McCoy that I was being removed as PI. And in that email exchange, Linda refers back to previous documents involving negotiating the terms of the renewal proposal. And the renewal proposal involved quite a bit of money. And these documents she refers back to are not ones that I ever saw or was alerted about. So there's an appearance there of perhaps that Linda was representing herself as acting on my behalf when that was not occurring. We don't know because we've never received any of this correspondence. We don't know to whether she was doing that with Director McCoy's approval or not, or what went on. So that remains a mystery. Finally, in Director McCoy's step 1 response, he mentions how they had demonstrated to the donor, the potential donor for the fixed dome planetarium, their commitment by receiving this $2.9 million NSF grant. So we asked for the proposal that was written to fund that grant to see to what extent it actually discussed producing planetarium content or had anything to do with planetariums. We didn't receive that proposal. I think we have found the abstract for that proposal online, and the abstract certainly doesn't seem to have anything to do with planetariums. And in fact, the material that we received in response to our RFI seems to indicate, could be wrong, I don't have all the information. It seems to indicate that currently Linda McGilvery and her department have 0 grant funding of any kind for either supporting a portable planetarium program or developing content for either a fixed dome or a portable planetarium. Basically, no grant funding of any kind related to planetariums. I don't have the full picture of funding on that department, but that's, at least as far as I can tell, appears to be the case. So let me conclude this by summarizing what I had in 2020 and where I am now, and then providing some final thoughts about what this all means for the faculty at UAF. So just to summarize, in 2020, I was sitting pretty. I had a 248. I was overseeing a 240K a year cooperative agreement that had 1 year left with a 5-year renewal option. I was overseeing a digital portable planetarium program that had funding for staff and content development, and we had some brand new equipment that we had just purchased. And I was involved in some pretty exciting negotiations to bring a fixed dome planetarium to Fairbanks. And I was set up to be basically the public face of that planetarium. And I would still maintain that I am by far the most qualified person to be the public face of a fixed dome planetarium. However, that was all taken away from me, and to continue where I left off, on the left, you can see now what we asked for going into step 2, and then you can see what I finally ended up with. So what I ended up with is far less than what I had. No real, I was very disappointed to lose a funded portable planetarium program, and frankly, it was really a dream job to sort of round out. I'm near retirement. I had hoped to round out and end my career as someone who was the first director for a planetarium at UAF. Finally, I want to briefly discuss what I think the regulation that was, or the university policy that has just been set forth, what it means for the research faculty. I think this is really pretty much an existential issue for us. that what this policy does is essentially make us indentured servants. You can see, of course, when you're removed as principal investigator, this is a devastating blow to your career. Not only does it remove your funding for the current grant, but it removes the funding line, that funding line for many future grants that you might obtain coming out of the current grant. And so you can see very quickly, because all that has to happen for research faculty to not retain their job is for you to go a year or two not meeting your required your soft money requirements. And so you can see that effectively, if you're research faculty, you can be told that if you get out of line, we're going to take your grants and reassign them to staff or to your postdoc. And then in future years, if you don't then replace that money with new complete lines of funding, you'll be out of a job. And if you doubt that that will happen, that will be used in that way, well, that's basically what was done to me. And if I had not had the good fortune to end up with some long-term funding sources that come from being assigned to be on the science team for a couple of planetary missions, and those are things that really are specific to an individual and cannot possibly be reassigned to other individuals, then without those, I would probably be in the position where I'd be getting let go by this university. So that's all I've got. I hope that we will that something will happen moving forward through Faculty Senate to address some of these issues. Thank you.